Hello and welcome to a special episode of The Apple Seed. I'm your host, Sam Payne, and this is a bonus episode we're excited to bring you, featuring the sort of storytellers we haven't shared often enough on the show. These are kid storytellers, young storytellers in the making. They're winners of an annual contest called National Youth Storytelling, or NYS. Now, the winners of that contest get to perform on stage at the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival, the largest storytelling festival in the West, bringing great storytellers to festival tents and classrooms and concert halls for more than 35 years. The winners also attend a week of storytelling workshops with pro storytellers, and as part of that week, they come to the Appleseed Studios to see some of our favorite tellers in live performances. And we caught some recordings of some of the terrific performances of these young tellers, and we're going to share some of them with you today. We loved hosting these guys. Some told personal stories, some told folk tales or tall tales, and some took old stories and put their own twist on them. Now, storytellers call that a fractured tale. And our first story today is a fractured retelling of the old story of Hansel and Gretel. This version is called Candy House Witch. The storyteller is Claire Burnham, a high school senior from Utah. Here's Claire.
How did things get so out of hand that I wound up trapped in my very own oven? My life was perfectly normal a few days ago before Hansel and Gretel came along. At least, as normal as it can be for a witch who lives in a house made out of candy. I know what you're thinking. A house made out of candy? Isn't that impractical? Well, yes, but that's why I live in the middle of the woods, far, far away from ravenous little children and their sticky little fingers. How was I supposed to know those sticky little fingers would come to me? It all started one night as I sat myself down for dinner. I heard, outside, a peculiar noise. Crunch, crunch, nibble, nibble, munch, munch, munch. What was that? Crunch, crunch, nibble, nibble, munch, munch, munch. Now, I'm rather well known for not having the best eyesight, but I can assure you my hearing is just fine. Crunch, crunch, nibble, nibble, munch, munch, munch. I rushed outside, ready to defend my house against whatever critter was snacking on it this time, when I found two little children. What on earth are kids like you doing in the middle of the woods? Who I assumed was the older brother took charge. Our parents left us in the middle of the woods, breadcrumb trail. We left a trail of breadcrumbs, but the birds ate it, and now we're lost, and, oh, you poor dears, come in. I sat them down, I shared my dinner, and I learned that their names were Hansel and Gretel. They seemed like perfectly sweet children and perfectly fine house guests, so I allowed them to stay the night. The next morning, I awoke to that same sound. Crunch, crunch, nibble, nibble, munch, munch, munch. Again? Crunch, crunch, nibble, nibble, munch, munch, munch. I rushed outside and found that Hansel and Gretel were eating my house. They were chewing on my chocolate, licking all my licorice, gorging on my gumdrops, wolfing down my wafers, feasting on my frosting. Those chittering children chowed down on the delectable decor of my dwelling. What on earth is wrong with you people, eating other people's houses? We're sorry. Gretel didn't look very sorry, with chocolate smeared so thickly over her face that even I could see it. I marched them back inside, demanded they clean themselves up. But do you think they stopped? No! For the rest of the day, what did I hear? Crunch, crunch, nibble, nibble, munch, munch, munch. Every time I turned my back, crunch, crunch, nibble, nibble, munch, munch, munch. Every time I let them out of my eyesight, Crunch, crunch, nibble, nibble, munch, munch, munch. I had had enough. That is it. You need to leave. You simply cannot stay here anymore. You've chewed through all of my chairs, bitten through every banister, which, Hansel and Gretel, is an OSHA violation, by the way. You have to go. But we don't want to leave, said Hansel as he licked his fingers clean of my lollipop lamps. Yeah, we want to stay. Gretel's mouth was blue from eating my blue raspberry bubblegum baking bowls. I was at my limit. Since I am a nice witch with no dungeon, I had to find something else to throw the little homewreckers into to contain their ravenous appetite. I found my large copper cooking pot, so I picked them up by the scruffs of their necks and dumped them in. She's gonna eat us! No, Hansel, you're just in timeout. She's gonna eat us! No, Gretel, it's called setting boundaries. As they continued to wail, I got to work baking cookies to try and patch the gaping holes in my walls. I enjoyed a few peaceful, snackless moments when I heard.
Crunch, crunch, nibble, nibble, munch, munch, munch.
What was that?
Crunch, crunch, nibble, nibble, munch, munch, munch.
Hansel? Gretel? What are you doing?
Crunch, crunch, nibble, nibble, munch, munch, munch.
Hansel and Gretel burst out of the pot, having chewed clean through it. Apparently, my eyesight had mixed up my copper cooking pot with my chocolate cooking pot, which, yes, I have. My house has a theme, in case you haven't noticed. Those ravenous children chewed their way free, and in their sugar-fueled panic, they bumped into me, and I tripped and slipped and fell into my open oven. They skedaddled, never to be seen again, and I am still here, inside this oven, with these cookies I forgot to set a timer for. Stuck forever. I guess that's the way the cookie crumbles. Or in my case, burns to a crisp. Unless, of course, you let me out.
That was Claire Burnham with her own fairy tale adaptation called Candy House Witch. Our next story comes from a 15-year-old storyteller named Rebekah Garcia, who borrows a tale from her Texas home state and combines it with a bit of her own personal story. She calls it Texas Tall Tale. Here's Rebekah.
I have lived in Texas my entire life, and growing up there, I've developed a type of pride in my state. Although there are a few cons to living there. For one, the weather. 1 minute it's nice and breezy, the next thing you know it's like 101 degrees. Also, the rattlesnakes. Ugh, I hate the rattlesnakes. I have nearly died like 5 times because of them. But what I hate more than anything else are the tornadoes. I remember once when my family and I were coming home from a road trip, we saw a huge thunderstorm in the distance, and my dad, trying to lighten the mood, decided to play some classical music. And he made a comment about how the lightning was striking at the same time as the music. We all laughed until we realized we were heading that way. By the time we got home, the storm had faded, but as we pulled into the neighborhood, we saw everybody outside with flashlights, checking for damage. It was then that we realized that the thunderstorm was actually a tornado, and it had hit our house. Ever since then, I've always been scared of tornadoes, and it still surprises me how some people can stand there and shake when they see a tornado coming, and others can get out their lasso and ride it like a wild bronco. Some people like Pecos Bill. Pecos Bill wasn't always the greatest cowboy in all of Texas. In fact, his name wasn't always Pecos Bill. He was just Bill. When Bill was a little boy, his family decided to move to the Wild West, and Bill would help them by carrying all the heavy stuff that they couldn't. His mother would say, "He's as strong as a bull." His father would say, No. He's as strong as 3 bulls." One day on the trip, Bill decided to go fishing. He grabbed out his fishing pole and threw the line out into the water. And he waited and waited until a catfish as big as New England took hold of the hook and dragged him into the water. But Bill held on even as they went further and further downriver. He would have most surely drowned if not for a pack of wild coyotes that found him and raised him as their own. As Bill grew up, he learned how to hunt like a coyote, how to eat like a coyote, and even how to howl like a coyote. Howl! Bill became certain that he was, in fact, a coyote. One day, a man was traveling along the Pecos River when he spotted Bill. He hopped off his horse and walked up to him. He said, "Who are you?" "I'm a coyote," said Bill. "No, you ain't." "Oh, yes, I am." "If you's a coyote, then where's your tail?" Bill looked behind him. "If I am not a coyote, then what am I?" "You are a very strong boy. I'm Curly Joe. What's your name?" "I'm Bill." They decided to change his name from Bill into Pecos Bill since they found him by the Pecos River. Curly Joe promised Pecos Bill that he would teach him how to become the greatest cowboy in all of Texas. And so their adventures began. One day, they were traveling in the desert, and the sun was high in the sky, and it was so hot. And there was a giant rattlesnake hiding behind a rock. And as Pecos Bill walked by, it jumped out and bit him right on the leg. It had enough venom to make any grown man die. But Pecos Bill just laughed. He picked up the snake and put it around his neck like a scarf. And they became friends. Well, the cowboy lessons were going great, but they realized Pecos Bill needed a horse. And so the search began. One day while they were still in the desert, they saw a huge dust storm in the distance, and in the center of it was a beautiful horse, a black mare. "Who's that?" asked Pecos Bill. "That's Widowmaker. There's not a man alive who can ride her." Well, Pecos Bill just took that as a challenge, and he hopped right on her back. Of course, Widowmaker kicked and bucked, but Pecos Bill held on, and the fight went on for 3 days and 3 nights. And eventually, Widowmaker decided it would be easier if they were just friends. And so they were. One day in the early spring, Pecos Bill and his friends were all still sleeping when a huge tornado came out of nowhere and swept up Curly Joe the rattlesnake and Widowmaker. Well, Pecos Bill could not let that be. He hopped up and grabbed out his lasso, and he threw it around the tornado, and he started climbing, and then he hopped on the tornado's back. And the tornado kept spinning and spinning, but Pecos Bill held on, until eventually the tornado let down all his friends. But still, Pecos Bill would not give up, and the tornado led him all the way to California, where it died out. Pecos Bill fell from the sky so hard, he made the Death Valley. Now, some of you might be sad, thinking that Pecos Bill is lying dead in a valley, but he had just hopped right back up and went to go find his friends. And they went on lots more adventures, but it appears that I don't have enough time to tell you them all today. But remember this, Pecos Bill isn't known for his wits or even his strength, but for his courage. And his stories have helped me when I'm scared, like when the tornado hit my house. And they have reminded me to be brave. So next time you hear talk about a tornado, think of Pecos Bill, the greatest cowboy in all of Texas. Thank you.
Texas Tall Tale by Rebekah Garcia. Up next is a musical folktale about Raven's journey to bring back the world's first fire. A lot of First Nations traditions feature tales about raven or crow bringing fire, and this performance is based on a picture book that tells a story like that. The book is called Rainbow Crow. It's written by Nancy Van Lan, and it's based on a story she heard from Bill Whippoorwill Thompson and told in the book with his permission. Now, the version we're sharing today is an original adaptation told and sung to us by a 6th grade storyteller named Cohen Botkin. Here's Cohen.
I am the rainbow crow. I sing my song where I go. From tree to tree I'll spread my cheer, a message of love for all to hear. Many, many years ago, the world was warm and the sun was always shining brightly. The animals who lived in the forest spent all their time playing and enjoying themselves. "Tag, you're it!" cried Mouse as he raced away from Rabbit. Mouse, although small, was excellent at tag, and Rabbit knew he would be tricky to catch. So, instead, Rabbit turned and started looking for Deer. "Ah, there she is," thought Rabbit as he quietly began to hop towards Deer. Closer and closer Rabbit got, and Deer still hadn't heard him. Rabbit was just about to reach out and tag Deer when they both heard a sound coming from the sky. "I am the rainbow crow. I sing my song where I go. From tree to tree I'll spread my cheer, a message of love for all to hear." It was Rainbow Crow. Now, Rainbow Crow was the most magnificent bird in the forest. Each feather on his wing sparkled with every shade of the rainbow. He also had a lovely singing voice all the animals admired. "Hello, Rainbow Crow," said Deer. "Hello, friends," cawed Rainbow Crow as he gracefully flew away. "Okay, who's it?" said Mouse. And that was when they all saw it. A single white snowflake falling to the ground. The animals all looked at it in amazement. They had never seen such a thing. It slowly floated all the way to the ground. And then it started snowing everywhere. The animals, who had never seen snow, were not afraid. "This is odd," said Mouse, as he watched the snow cover the weeds on the ground. "Yeah, this is strange," said Rabbit, as he watched wind blow snow off the branches of the trees. "I don't like it," said Deer as she pushed the snow away from her hoof. But when the snow piled up to Mouse's nose, the animals began to worry. "Here, hop on my back," offered Rabbit. But when the snow piled up to Rabbit's nose, both Mouse and Rabbit had to hop on Deer's back in order to escape the snow. "I think we should tell Wise Old Owl about this," said Mouse, and they all agreed. By the time the trio got to Wise Old Owl's tree, a couple of other animals had also gathered. Fox, Badger, and Bobcat were near Wise Old Owl's tree, all looking around anxiously at the snow. Wise Old Owl, hearing the commotion of the animals outside, poked his head out and looked around. "This has been falling for hours," cried Fox. "Soon we'll all be buried," said Badger. "What can you do to make it stop?" asked Bobcat. Wise Old Owl looked to the left, looked to the right, sighed, and said, "I don't know how to stop this. Someone must journey up to the heavens and ask the Creator how to stop." A hush came over the animals. A journey to the Creator would be difficult, and it would be hard. "I'll do it," said a voice up on a branch. The animals looked, and there perched Rainbow Crow. "I'll be willing to make the journey if it'll help save my friends." And with that, Rainbow Crow pumped his beautiful wings and launched into the air. Rainbow Crow pumped his beautiful wings harder and harder, longer than he had ever flown before. As he flew, he sang. I am the rainbow crow. I sing my song where I go. From tree to tree I'll spread my cheer, a message of love for all to hear. The song caught the attention of the creator, who was most pleased with the melody and offered Rainbow Crow a wish in return. The animals and I were to like it if the winter were to stop, said Rainbow Crow. The ground has gotten hard and it is difficult to peck for worms. The pond is frozen and food has gotten scarce. But when Rainbow Crow said this, the creator's face fell. I'm sorry, Rainbow Crow, said the creator, but I do not know how to stop this. But I do have a gift that will help you and the animals endure it, as he handed Rainbow Crow a burning stick of fire. But you must hurry home or it may swallow you up. Rainbow Crow thanked the creator for his gift, took the stick of fire in his beak, and quickly began to fly home. Rainbow Crow pumped his beautiful wings faster and faster, faster than he had ever flown before. But the journey was long and the fire was burned very hot. Soon the flames were burning Rainbow Crow. Multiple times he thought of tossing the stick from his beak, but then thought of his friends and kept flying on. By the time the animals, who were still gathered at Wise Old Owl's tree, saw Rainbow Crow, all they could see was a ball of fire flying towards them. Closer and closer Rainbow Crow got till he landed. The animals marveled over the fire, how bright and warm it was. But they could also see that it had changed Rainbow Crow. His beautiful feathers were now scorched black from the flames, and when they cried out to him to see how his journey was, they noted that his voice was no longer beautiful, but dry and crackly, as they understood the song he had sung to them many times. I am the Rainbow Crow. I sing my song where I go. From tree to tree I'll spread my cheer, a message of love for all to hear. So, from then on, Crow's feathers were black and his voice was crackly. But Rainbow Crow never regretted his sacrifice, because his actions had saved all the animals, and nothing was more important than that. So, if you ever come across a crow feather and hold it up to the sun just right, you'll be able to see the faint shimmer of beautiful colors and be reminded of Rainbow Crow. So if you're feeling low, just listen for my friendly crow, and every caw the meaning clear, a message of love for all to hear.
Cohen Botkin with his adaptation of a story called Rainbow Crow. And our last story today is told by 12-year-old storyteller Elsie Parkinson from Virginia. She'll tell us a story called One Wish, a twist on a classic folktale adapted to her own family story. Here's Elsie.
You've probably heard at least one version of this story before, but you've never heard about how it happened to my great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, Annie Tordoff, who lived in England in the 19th century. Now, the week before my story takes place, there had been a terrible storm, which had completely destroyed that year's crops and vacuumed off the Tordoff's roof. And so, Annie was picking up fallen sticks and branches so she could hopefully patch up her roof before it rained that night. While Annie was doing this, she saw a fox sneaking towards the woods. Now, Annie loved nature, and so she decided to follow him and see what he was up to. Setting down her sticks and branches, she began to tiptoe after him. After about 3 minutes of walking, the fox stopped, crouched, and readied himself to spring. Annie looked around to see what he was aiming for and saw a quail sitting on a nest of 12 eggs. Annie frantically picked up a stick, hit the fox, sending him flying through the air. The quail, who had been watching with interest, hopped off the nest towards Annie and bowed. "Thank you for rescuing my eggs," she said. "I am truly indebted to you." Then she looked at Annie, obviously waiting for some kind of reply. You're welcome? What? Have you never seen a quail before?" "Oh, no, I've seen a quail many times. I've just never heard one speak." "Then you haven't been listening hard enough." Annie had no argument for that, and so she wisely stayed silent. Now, what would you like as your reward? My reward? Yes, your reward. Would you like a golden goose? Perhaps a singing harp? Annie just looked at her. I know. I will give you a wish. A wish? Yes, a wish. Come back tomorrow and tell me what you wish for. And then she turned and hopped back onto her nest. After a few seconds, she looked back up, saw Annie, and shooed her away with her wing. Shoo, shoo! Come back tomorrow and tell me what you wish for. So Annie turned and dumbly walked back through the forest. So dumbly, in fact, that she walked straight into her father-in-law, who lived with her and her deaf husband Joseph in their small log cabin. My dear, he said. Then he took one look at her surprised, happy face and began again. My dear, what has happened? Has some rich uncle we didn't know we had died and left us with £1 million? Oh, no, said Annie. Something better. Better than £1 million? What's better than £1 million? A wish. A wish? Where'd you get a wish? In the woods. Well, yes, of course, but when? Never mind. You know what we must wish for, my dear. Annie did not know. We must wish for a new roof. Better yet, a new house entirely. Annie thought this was an excellent idea, said so, and continued her walk home. As soon as she opened her door, she saw Joseph kneeling on the floor tying his boots, and so she told him the entire tale. Halfway through, Joseph looked up, saw her, and began to laugh. You see, as I said before, Joseph was deaf and hadn't heard a word she said. Annie blushed and began the tale again. As soon as he had gotten the gist of it, Joseph practically began jumping up and down with excitement. Annie, my dear, you know what we must wish for. We have been waiting for this forever. We have? Yes, we will wish for my hearing. But just then he was cut off by the opening of the bedroom door. No, Joseph. This was his mother. No, you must not wish for your hearing. I mean, hearing is quite good and well. But you must wish for a baby. A child for you and Joseph. A grandbaby for me before I die. Of the 3 wishes, Annie loved this one the most. And all that day she thought of the 3 ideas and could not decide. But that night when it began to rain and she got soaked in her bed, she knew that she would most definitely wish for a new house. But when she dried off, her views had changed entirely, and she wanted something else. I don't know quite what. But with the first embers of dawn, Annie knew what she would wish for. She jumped out of bed, got dressed, and began running through the woods, waking up all the birds in the forest, including the quail. What are you doing this early in the morning? Oh, yes, you have a wish. Humans and wishes. You'd think wishes were better than eggs. Annie, who did think that wishes were better than eggs, but wisely did not say so, stayed silent. Now, what would you like to wish for? I wish, began Annie. Then she thought one moment longer. Yes, this is what she would wish for. I wish that my husband could hear my baby laugh in a new house. And so it was granted. A few weeks later, a rich uncle they didn't know they had died and left them with a small fortune, just enough to buy a new house. And then Annie had a baby. And when that baby first laughed, Joseph could hear every peal.
That was One Wish, told by Elsie Parkinson. What a treat to have had these talented young storytellers with us in the Appleseed studio. We want to thank the National Youth Storytelling Program for being a longtime friend of the Appleseed, and we want to thank Claire, Rebekah, Cohen, and Elsie for their stories, and we want to give a shout out to all the youth storytellers that visited our studio. Did the stories you heard today bring to mind some of your own memories and stories? We hope so. And we hope you open your mouth and share those stories with the folks you love. You can find out more about youth storytelling by visiting nationalyouthstorytelling.org. I'm your host, Sam Payne. Thanks for joining us for this special bonus episode of The Appleseed. The Appleseed is produced by me, Sam Payne, Wendy Folsom, Brian Tanner, and Kira Van Dam. Our audio engineer is DJ Cromarty, and the rest of the Appleseed team is Tristan Schetzel, Kay Hendricks, and Nico Wetzel. And if you like today's podcast, subscribe, rate us, leave us a review, and tell your friends. That's how the podcast grows. We also love to receive emails. Email us at theappleseed@byu.edu. That's theappleseed, all one word, at byu.edu. Your thoughts and comments help us shape the future of the Appleseed. We're pleased and proud to be among the many podcasts produced by the BYU Radio family of shows. If you want more great storytelling for the whole family, then search for our companion podcast, Kaboom, where you'll hear original audio adventures for the whole family. You can find any episode of The Appleseed or Kaboom on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on the BYU Radio app, or at byuradio.org. I'm Sam Payne, and we can't wait to be with you again on The Appleseed. Hi, Sam here, and I want to take just a moment to let you know about a new podcast from BYU Radio. It's called Uncomfy, Sticking with Moments That Challenge Us. And it's a podcast in which you hear stories from people who experienced something, either tough advice from a close friend or engagement with somebody on the other end of the political spectrum, conversations that made them really uncomfortable. But instead of backing away or getting angry or defensive, they kind of leaned in. They sort of stuck with the discomfort and heard out the person that was communicating with them. And they're glad they did. Not because it changed their position, because it clarified their own beliefs. And Uncomfy, the podcast, features stories of folks who engaged in that way. It's really helping me engage with a world in which division really seems to be the norm. Uncomfy, Sticking with Moments That Challenge Us is the name of the podcast. And, you know, if you listen to The Appleseed, then you've heard us say stories bring us together. It's kind of how I feel about the conversations that happen on Uncomfy. You can find it wherever you might be listening. You can watch it on the BYU Radio app. It's a video and audio podcast. There are lots of great ways to engage with these conversations. Uncomfy, Sticking with Moments That Challenge Us. Check it out. There's a lot coming up, but I want to take just a moment to let you know about another show from among the BYU Radio family of podcasts. The podcast is called Constant Wonder, and it's hosted by Marcus Smith. In each episode, Marcus takes you on kind of a quest to find the awe and wonder in all nature, human or wild. Not just interested in the natural world, interested in human nature as well. Marcus's guests tell fascinating stories and talk about experiences that have left them awestruck. You'll love the podcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all kinds of places to listen to Constant Wonder anytime you need a little dose of awe or wonder in your life. Constant Wonder from BYU Radio.